They excluded me from the family reunion, and at first, I thought it had been a simple mistake. Looking back now, I almost wish it had been. I'm Margaret Whitmore, 71 years old, a widow, a mother, a grandmother, and until that summer afternoon, I believed I still had a place in my family. The discovery happened by accident. I was sitting in my sunroom with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the late June sunlight settle across my backyard, when my phone chimed with a social media notification. I almost ignored it. Social media had never been my favorite thing. But when I opened the app, the first photo stopped me cold. There they were. My son Brandon, my daughter-in-law Vanessa, my grandchildren, my nieces, nephews, cousins, and family friends. More than 40 people gathered beneath a pavilion decorated with blue and white banners that read, Whitmore Family Reunion 2026. I stared at the screen for several seconds, certain I had misunderstood something. Maybe it was an old picture. Maybe it was from another gathering. But as I scrolled, more photos appeared. Children running across the grass. Tables covered with barbecue trays and lemonade pitchers. Family members smiling for group photos. The timestamp showed they had been posted less than an hour earlier. The reunion was happening that very day. Without me. I enlarged one picture and searched the crowd. Then another. Then another. My heart sank a little deeper each time. I wasn't there. Not because I had arrived late. Not because I had stepped away when the photos were taken. I simply wasn't included. The strangest part was that no one had mentioned a reunion. Not Brandon. Not Vanessa. Not even my granddaughter Emily, who usually texted me every week. I set my phone down carefully on the table and looked around the quiet room. The silence suddenly felt heavier than before. For several minutes, I tried to come up with reasonable explanations. Maybe the invitations had been lost. Maybe plans had changed at the last minute. Maybe someone assumed another family member had told me. Families make mistakes. I had spent most of my life giving people the benefit of the doubt. Still, something didn't feel right. The reunion wasn't a small gathering. It had clearly taken weeks of planning. Food had been ordered. Decorations had been prepared. Matching t-shirts had been printed. Dozens of people knew about it. Yet somehow, no one had thought to tell me. I opened my contacts and considered calling Brandon. My thumb hovered over his name. Then I stopped. I didn't want to sound hurt. I didn't want to sound needy. Most of all, I didn't want to hear an excuse that might make the truth even harder to ignore. Instead, I closed my phone and carried my empty teacup into the kitchen. As I rinsed it in the sink, I noticed the casserole dish sitting on the counter. 2 days earlier, I had prepared my famous baked macaroni because Emily had mentioned wanting the recipe. I had been planning to bring it to our next family gathering whenever that happened. Now I stood there looking at it and wondering whether everyone had enjoyed a reunion meal together while I spent the afternoon alone. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Emily. The words were short, casual, completely innocent. But they changed everything. Grandma, I hope you're having a relaxing weekend. I was surprised you didn't come today. I thought you told Dad you didn't want to be part of family reunions anymore. I read the message 3 times. Then a fourth. A strange chill moved through me despite the summer heat outside. Because I had never said any such thing. Not once. Not to Brandon. Not to anyone. And in that moment, staring at those words on my screen, I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding at all. Someone had told my family a story about me. And somehow, they had all believed it. I sat at my kitchen table long after reading Emily's message. The screen of my phone had gone dark, but the words remained clear in my mind. I thought you told Dad you did not want to be part of family reunions anymore. It was such a simple sentence, yet it carried the weight of something much larger. Someone had said those words for me. Someone had created a version of me that did not exist. For the first time that day, I felt something stronger than confusion. I felt unsettled. I picked up my phone and typed a reply to Emily. I kept it short. Sweetheart, I never said that. Would you have time to talk? The 3 dots appeared almost immediately. A few seconds later, my phone rang. Emily's voice sounded cheerful at first, but that changed the moment I explained what had happened. There was a long pause. Then she said, Grandma, everyone thought you wanted space. Dad told us that months ago. I stared out the window at the oak tree in my backyard. The branches swayed gently in the summer breeze. Everything outside looked peaceful. Inside, something was beginning to crack. Months ago, I asked quietly. Yes, Emily replied. I remember because Aunt Rebecca asked if you would be coming to the 4th of July picnic, and Dad said you preferred staying home now. I closed my eyes. The 4th of July picnic. I had not been invited to that gathering either. At the time, I assumed they had wanted something smaller. Then another memory surfaced. My great-nephew's graduation party. The Christmas brunch at Brandon's house. A birthday dinner for one of the grandchildren. One by one, events I had missed over the past few years began lining up in my mind like puzzle pieces. Each absence had seemed understandable on its own. Together, they formed a pattern. Emily continued talking, unaware of the storm building inside me. Honestly, Grandma, everybody thought it was your choice. Nobody wanted to pressure you. Nobody wanted to pressure me. The words stung because they sounded reasonable. If someone truly believed I had chosen distance, their actions would make sense. The problem was that I had never made that choice. Not once. After the call ended, I sat in silence for several minutes. Then I walked to the hallway closet and pulled down an old photo album. Dust clung to the cover. I carried it back to the table and slowly turned the pages. There was Brandon at 8 years old, holding a fishing rod nearly as tall as he was. There we were at Yellowstone during a summer road trip. Another picture showed a crowded Thanksgiving dinner from 20 years earlier. Family had always been the center of my life. Not because everything was perfect, but because showing up mattered. Through marriages, illnesses, births, and losses, we showed up. Or at least we used to. As the afternoon faded into evening, I found myself replaying conversations from the past few years. Small comments that I had dismissed at the time now sounded different. Vanessa mentioning that everyone had busy schedules. Brandon saying gatherings had been thrown together at the last minute. Family members acting surprised when I remembered events differently than they did. None of it had seemed important then. Now it felt impossible to ignore. Around 7 o'clock, another message arrived from Emily. This one included a photo. It showed several family members sitting around a picnic table at the reunion. Everyone was smiling. Attached beneath it was a short note. Grandma, I found this strange. When I asked Mom why you stopped coming to family events, she said you were happier without all the family drama. I read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Happier without all the family drama. It sounded nothing like me. I had spent years trying to hold the family together, even after my husband passed away. Yet somehow, people were being told the exact opposite. I set my phone down and looked at the family photos spread across my table. For the first time, I stopped asking whether there had been a misunderstanding. Because misunderstandings happen once. This had happened too many times. Someone had been telling my story for me, and I was beginning to suspect exactly who that person was. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Sleep had come in short pieces during the night, interrupted by thoughts I could not quiet. The house felt different somehow, not because anything had changed inside it, but because something had changed inside me. For years, I had accepted every missed invitation, every awkward explanation, every moment when I seemed to be standing just outside the circle of my own family. I had always chosen the explanation that hurt the least. Now I was beginning to wonder how many of those explanations had been true. After breakfast, I opened an old wooden cabinet in my living room and pulled out several photo boxes. If someone had been rewriting my role in the family, I wanted to understand when it started. I spent hours sorting through photographs, holiday cards, handwritten notes, and printed invitations. Some of them brought smiles. Others brought questions. Around noon, I found a Christmas card from 4 years earlier. It had been sent by my cousin Linda. Inside, she had written, "We missed you at the family brunch. I hope you are enjoying your quiet time away from all the gatherings." At the time, I had assumed she was confusing me with someone else. Now I realized she had probably been told the same story everyone else had heard. A little later, I found an email from Aunt Rebecca. She had written, "I understand you needed space this year. We will miss seeing you." I remembered receiving that message and feeling puzzled. I had never asked for space. I had never told anyone I wanted distance. Yet there it was again. The same theme. The same version of me. Quiet. Withdrawn. Uninterested. As if someone had taken my place and introduced a stranger to the family. The more examples I found, the harder it became to dismiss them. Each one seemed small by itself. Together, they painted a picture that I did not recognize. By mid-afternoon, my dining table was covered with old papers. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating decades of family history. Birthdays, graduations, anniversaries, vacations. I looked at photographs of myself holding newborn grandchildren, organizing holiday dinners, and helping coordinate family events. For most of my life, I had been one of the people who brought everyone together. The idea that I suddenly wanted nothing to do with family made no sense at all. My phone buzzed. It was Emily again. This time she sounded hesitant. "Grandma," she said, "can I ask you something?" I told her, of course. She paused before speaking. "Did you ever tell Mom that family gatherings made you uncomfortable?" I felt a strange heaviness settle in my chest. "No," I answered. "Why?" Another pause. "Because she has said that for years." Years. Not months. Years. I thanked Emily for being honest. After we ended the call, I sat quietly in my chair and stared at the photographs scattered across the table. A memory surfaced. Several years earlier, Vanessa had offered to help coordinate communication between relatives because everyone was busy. She started group messages, organized schedules, shared updates. At the time, it seemed helpful. Nobody questioned it. Why would they? She appeared organized, thoughtful, and involved. But now I began seeing those years differently. If information flowed through one person, that person had tremendous influence. Not through dramatic lies, not through obvious manipulation, just through small comments repeated often enough to become accepted as truth. As evening approached, I gathered the photographs and returned them to their boxes. I felt sadness, but something else had appeared beside it. Clarity. For the first time, I could see that this was not about a single reunion. It was not even about one missed invitation. Someone had spent years quietly shaping how the family saw me. And the most unsettling part was realizing how successful they had been. Over the next few days, I stopped looking for dramatic answers because I was beginning to understand that the truth was probably much quieter. Most family divisions do not happen in a single moment. They happen one conversation at a time, one assumption at a time, one small comment repeated often enough that nobody thinks to question it. Emily and I continued exchanging messages. Nothing secretive, nothing complicated. She simply shared memories and observations. The more we talked, the more a pattern emerged. Vanessa seemed to appear at the center of almost every misunderstanding. If someone wondered why I was absent, she already had an explanation. If a family member wanted to invite me somewhere, she often volunteered to pass along the information. If questions arose about my feelings or opinions, she seemed ready with answers before anyone asked me directly. I found myself remembering a conversation from nearly 3 years earlier. My cousin Linda had called and apologized for missing my birthday lunch. At the time, I thought she had forgotten the date. During our conversation, she sounded confused when I mentioned how disappointed I had been. She replied, "I thought you canceled because you wanted a quiet day by yourself." I remembered feeling puzzled, but not enough to challenge her. Now, sitting in my living room with a notebook in my lap, I wrote down the memory alongside several others. The list grew longer than I expected. Another memory surfaced. Brandon and Vanessa had hosted Thanksgiving 2 years ago. A week afterward, one of my nephews called and thanked me for understanding the limited guest list. I had no idea what he meant. Apparently, several relatives believed I had declined the invitation because I did not enjoy large gatherings anymore. Back then, I laughed it off. Now I understood that he had not invented that idea on his own. Someone had planted it. One evening, Emily asked if she could stop by. She arrived carrying iced coffees and a thoughtful expression that reminded me of her grandfather. We sat on the back porch while the sun dipped behind the trees. Neither of us rushed the conversation. Eventually she said, "Grandma, I have been thinking about something." I waited. Whenever family plans came up, Mom always seemed to be the messenger. Everybody trusted her because she was organized. I nodded slowly. Emily looked down at her cup. I never questioned it before. Neither had I. Trust has a way of disguising patterns that would otherwise seem obvious. If someone is viewed as helpful, people rarely examine how much influence they have. We talked for nearly an hour. During that conversation, Emily mentioned several occasions when relatives believed I had chosen not to participate in events that I had never even heard about. Every example sounded familiar, not because I remembered the events themselves, but because I recognized the explanation attached to them. Margaret prefers being alone. Margaret needs space. Margaret is happier staying home. The words were always slightly different, but the message remained the same. By the time Emily left, the sky had turned dark. The answer began to reveal itself in the most unexpected way. A week after Emily visited, she called me again. This time, there was an urgency in her voice. Not panic, not excitement, something closer to realization. She asked if she could come over, and less than an hour later she was sitting across from me at the kitchen table. She had brought her laptop. For a few moments, she simply stared at the screen before finally speaking. "Grandma, I think I found something." I waited quietly. Over the past several days, I had learned that patience often uncovered more than confrontation ever could. Emily turned the laptop toward me. Several photographs filled the screen. They were family pictures from different years. Birthdays, Thanksgiving dinners, graduation celebrations. At first, I did not understand what she wanted me to see. Then she pointed to the center of each image. In nearly every photograph, I was surrounded by relatives. Children sat beside me. Cousins leaned toward me. Grandchildren smiled in my direction. The gatherings seemed to naturally orbit around wherever I happened to be standing. Emily clicked through more pictures. The pattern continued. "I never noticed this before," she said softly. "But you are always the person everybody gathers around." I looked at the screen without speaking. To me, those moments had never felt significant. I was simply participating in family life. But as the photographs continued appearing, I began seeing them through someone else's eyes. Emily hesitated before continuing. "I remember Mom making comments sometimes." I glanced up. "What kind of comments?" Emily shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Things like how nobody appreciated how much work she did, or how family members always wanted your opinion first. I felt a faint chill. Those remarks sounded familiar. Not because I had heard them directly, but because I remembered moments when Vanessa seemed oddly irritated after family events that everyone else enjoyed. At the time, I assumed she was tired from hosting responsibilities. Emily opened another folder. Inside were old messages saved from family group chats. Nothing dramatic, nothing openly hostile, but a pattern slowly emerged. Whenever relatives praised me for organizing gatherings, sharing family recipes, or helping solve problems, Vanessa often redirected attention elsewhere. Sometimes she changed the subject entirely. Sometimes she emphasized her own efforts. The comments seemed harmless in isolation. Together they told a different story. As the afternoon sunlight stretched across the kitchen floor, Emily finally said the thing neither of us had wanted to say out loud. "I think she felt invisible." The words lingered between us. Invisible. Suddenly many things made sense. Not because they excused what had happened, but because they offered a possible explanation. If Vanessa believed family affection was limited, then every compliment given to someone else might have felt like something taken away from her. Every tradition connected to me might have felt like a reminder that she could never fully replace the role I held. I thought back to the years after my husband passed away. Family members often called me for advice. Grandchildren visited unexpectedly. Relatives stopped by for coffee. None of it was planned. None of it was requested. It simply happened. Relationships built over decades tend to work that way. Yet from a distance, perhaps it looked different. Perhaps someone watching those interactions began viewing them as competition instead of connection. After Emily left, I remained at the kitchen table long after sunset. The house was quiet except for the steady ticking of the wall clock. For days I had been searching for evidence. Now I found myself thinking about something else entirely. Motive. Because the deeper I looked, the more I suspected that this had never been about keeping me away from family gatherings. It had been about changing who occupied the center of the family itself. And if that was true, then the most surprising discovery was still waiting ahead. The following week brought a discovery that changed the direction of everything. It did not come from a hidden message or a dramatic confession. It came from something much simpler. A conversation. Emily called me one afternoon while I was watering the flowers near my front porch. I could tell from her voice that she had been thinking about our recent discussions. She sounded thoughtful, almost cautious. After a few minutes of ordinary conversation, she said something that immediately caught my attention. "Grandma, I talked to Aunt Rebecca yesterday." I set the watering can down beside the flower bed. "What did she say?" Emily hesitated. "She told me she always thought it was strange that you stopped calling family members as much." I frowned. The comment made little sense. Over the years, I had certainly called less often than I once did, but that had happened for a practical reason. After my husband passed away, many conversations naturally became shorter. Life changed. People became busy. Still, I had never disappeared. I had never withdrawn from the family. Emily continued. Then Aunt Rebecca mentioned something interesting. She said every time she tried reaching out to you directly, Mom would somehow already know about it. I stood very still. "What do you mean?" I do not know exactly, Emily said. But she said Mom always seemed to know who was talking to you and what they discussed. After the call ended, I found myself thinking about that statement for the rest of the afternoon. It was not evidence of anything by itself, yet it matched a pattern I had started noticing. Vanessa often positioned herself between family members. Not aggressively, not obviously, just enough to become the person through whom information traveled. The more I reflected on it, the more examples surfaced. Birthday plans, holiday schedules, family updates, invitations, changes in dates and locations. Somehow Vanessa frequently became the person communicating those details. A few days later, another piece of the puzzle appeared. Emily visited again, carrying a notebook she had started keeping. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and shared several conversations she had recently had with relatives. One by one, family members described similar experiences. Aunt Rebecca thought I preferred privacy. Cousin Linda believed I disliked large gatherings. One uncle assumed I found family events stressful. None of those ideas matched reality. Yet somehow everyone had reached roughly the same conclusion. That was what finally stood out. Different people rarely invent the exact same misunderstanding on their own. Shared assumptions usually begin somewhere. Emily noticed the same thing. Grandma, she said quietly, they are all describing the same version of you. I looked down at the notebook. She was right. The descriptions were nearly identical. Independent, distant, happier alone. The consistency was impossible to ignore. That evening, after Emily left, I sat on my back porch watching the sun sink below the trees. The air felt warm and still. Across the neighborhood, porch lights flickered on one by one. Normally, I enjoyed that peaceful hour of the day. This time, my thoughts remained fixed on a single question. Why had nobody ever asked me directly? Then the answer came almost immediately. Because people rarely question a story when it is delivered by someone they trust. Vanessa had spent years presenting herself as helpful, organized, and reliable. The family trusted her. Trust had become the foundation upon which every assumption was built. As darkness settled over the yard, I realized something important. I no longer needed to prove that misunderstandings existed. That part was becoming obvious. What mattered now was understanding how those misunderstandings had been sustained for so many years. And deep down, I suspected that the next answers would not come from old photographs or forgotten invitations. They would come from the people who had unknowingly been listening to the same story for far too long. Over the next several weeks, something unexpected began happening. The more family members spoke directly to one another, the more cracks appeared in the story they had accepted for years. Nobody was accusing anyone. Nobody was arguing. They were simply comparing memories. And once they started doing that, inconsistencies became impossible to ignore. It began with Aunt Rebecca. She called me one afternoon and asked if we could talk. Her voice carried the cautious tone of someone revisiting an old assumption. We spent nearly an hour on the phone. During that conversation, she mentioned several occasions when she believed I had declined invitations. I calmly explained that I had never received those invitations in the first place. There was a long silence on the line. Then she said something I will never forget. Margaret, if what you were saying is true, then I think we have all been operating on information that was never verified. That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. Information that was never verified. It perfectly described what had happened. People had not turned against me. They had simply trusted what they believed was reliable information. A few days later, Cousin Linda reached out. Then another relative. Then another. None of them arrived angry. Most sounded confused. Several seemed genuinely saddened. They all shared the same realization. They had spent years believing they were respecting my wishes. The truth was that nobody had actually asked me what those wishes were. Meanwhile, Emily continued noticing things she had never questioned before. She told me about a recent family dinner where conversations naturally drifted toward memories. As relatives exchanged stories, several of them recalled situations where they had tried including me in plans. Yet somehow the communication always seemed to pass through Vanessa. Every road led back to the same place. Emily did not accuse her mother of anything. She simply observed the pattern. The more people compared experiences, the more obvious it became. One Saturday morning, Emily stopped by with a thoughtful expression. We sat on the porch with coffee while birds moved between the trees in the backyard. After a few moments, she said, "Grandma, I think people are starting to see the difference between assumptions and facts." I smiled softly. It was a wise observation. Facts rarely need protection. Assumptions often do. Over the following days, conversations multiplied throughout the family. Relatives called each other. Old misunderstandings resurfaced. Events from years earlier were discussed from new perspectives. Nobody discovered a dramatic secret. Instead, they uncovered something much more powerful. They discovered how easily a narrative can grow when nobody pauses to confirm whether it is true. Then came the moment that changed everything. Emily called one evening after speaking with Brandon. My son had apparently become unsettled by the growing number of questions family members were asking. For the first time, he began reviewing his own memories. He started noticing that many of his beliefs about my preferences had not come from direct conversations with me. They had come through someone else. When Emily told me this, I felt neither satisfaction nor anger. Only sadness. Brandon was not a cruel man. He was a busy man. A trusting man. Like everyone else, he had accepted a story that seemed reasonable because it had been repeated for years. As summer slowly gave way to early autumn, I sensed that something important was approaching. Not a confrontation. Not a dramatic showdown. Something quieter. The truth had begun moving through the family the same way the misunderstanding once had. One conversation at a time. One realization at a time. And unlike the story that had isolated me, this one required no effort to maintain. Because the closer people looked, the clearer everything became. By early October, the atmosphere within the family had changed completely. Nobody was openly arguing, but a quiet shift was taking place. Questions that had never been asked before were finally being asked. Assumptions that had existed for years were being examined. Most importantly, people were beginning to speak directly to one another instead of relying on second-hand explanations. One Saturday afternoon, Aunt Rebecca organized a small family gathering at her home. It was not a major event, just a casual lunch with a handful of relatives. For the first time in years, I received the invitation directly from her. Not through someone else. Not through a group message managed by another person. She called me herself. When I arrived, I felt nervous in a way that surprised me. The driveway was lined with familiar cars. The smell of grilled burgers drifted through the cool autumn air. Children laughed in the backyard. It looked like dozens of gatherings I had attended throughout my life. Yet this one felt different because I did not know what to expect. The moment I stepped through the gate, Rebecca walked over and hugged me. Then Cousin Linda. Then several others. There was no dramatic apology, no emotional speech, just genuine warmth. For a while we sat together around a patio table, sharing stories and catching up on ordinary life. The conversation flowed naturally. At one point, someone mentioned a family picnic from several years earlier. Another person brought up a holiday gathering. Soon everyone was comparing memories. What struck me was how often the same pattern appeared. Relatives described occasions when they believed I had chosen not to attend. I calmly explained that I had never been invited. Again and again, surprised expressions appeared around the table. Nobody seemed angry. They seemed puzzled. It was as if they were collectively realizing how many pieces of information they had accepted without question. Then something happened that I had not anticipated. Brandon arrived. My son looked uncomfortable from the moment he stepped into the backyard. He greeted everyone politely, but I could tell his mind was elsewhere. Eventually, he sat beside me. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he quietly said, "Mom, I think I owe you an apology." I looked at him without responding. He stared down at his hands before continuing. "I have been thinking about everything Emily told me. And honestly, I do not know why I never asked you directly." His voice carried genuine regret. Not defensiveness. Not excuses. Just regret. I placed my hand gently over his. "We all trust people we love," I said. "That is not a crime." He nodded, but his expression remained troubled. Throughout the afternoon, more conversations unfolded. Relatives compared stories, dates, invitations, assumptions. Slowly a clearer picture emerged. Nobody had deliberately excluded me because they disliked me. Nobody had rejected me. Instead, they had been guided toward believing I no longer wanted to participate. The distinction mattered. It changed everything. As the gathering came to an end, I stood near the fence watching grandchildren play catch across the lawn. Their laughter carried through the crisp autumn air. For the first time in months, I felt something lifting from my shoulders. The truth was no longer hidden inside private conversations. It had become visible to everyone. Yet one question still remained unanswered. Family members now understood what had happened. They understood how the misunderstandings spread. What they still did not fully understand was why it had happened in the first place. And deep down, I sensed that the answer was closer than ever before. The answer arrived on a quiet Tuesday evening. There was no family meeting, no dramatic confrontation, no shocking confession delivered in front of a crowd. Instead, it came through a conversation that finally allowed everyone to stop guessing and start listening. Emily called me shortly after dinner. Her voice was calm. "Grandma, Dad talked with Mom today." I sat down in my favorite chair beside the living room window and listened. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Emily continued. It was a long conversation. I understood immediately. The questions that had been circulating through the family for weeks had finally reached the one person who could explain them. The next afternoon, Brandon came to visit. When I opened the door, I noticed how tired he looked. Not physically tired, emotionally tired. He stepped inside, accepted a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table where so many important conversations had happened over the years. For several minutes, he stared into his cup before speaking. "Mom," he said quietly, "I finally understand what happened." I remained silent. He needed to say it in his own words. "Vanessa told me she always felt like she could never measure up." He paused. "Not because of anything you did, because of how everyone responded to you." I looked out the window toward the backyard. The maple tree had begun shedding its autumn leaves. One by one, they drifted across the grass. Brandon continued. "She said every family event seemed to revolve around you. Every tradition, every story, every gathering. She felt like she was always standing in someone else's shadow." There it was. Not money, not inheritance, not resentment over a specific argument. Something much simpler and much sadder. Insecurity. Brandon explained that over time, Vanessa had begun convincing herself that the only way to create space for herself was to reduce the space occupied by someone else. She never planned a grand scheme. She never set out to destroy relationships. Instead, she made small comments, small assumptions, small explanations, one at a time. Over the years, those small moments became a narrative, and eventually, everyone accepted it. I listened quietly. Strangely, I felt no anger. What I felt was disappointment, because so much pain had grown from something that could have been solved with honesty. If Vanessa had simply expressed how she felt years earlier, perhaps things would have been different. Brandon rubbed his forehead and sighed. "The hardest part is that she admitted you never actually did anything wrong." Those words settled over the room. You never actually did anything wrong. For months, I had searched for an explanation. Now that it had arrived, it felt almost unbelievable. Not because it was complicated, but because it was so unnecessary. A few days later, several family members gathered for lunch at Rebecca's house. This time there was no confusion about invitations. Everyone had received them directly. As we sat together, conversations flowed naturally. Laughter returned. Stories were shared. Children ran across the yard, chasing one another beneath the bright autumn sky. At one point, I looked around the table and noticed something remarkable. Nobody seemed interested in assigning blame anymore. They were focused on rebuilding trust. Aunt Rebecca reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Linda smiled warmly. Emily sat beside me, grinning as she described plans for college. For the first time in a very long while, I felt fully present within my own family again. Later that evening, after returning home, I sat alone on my porch and watched the sunset paint the sky with shades of gold and orange. I thought about everything that had happened. The missed invitations, the misunderstandings, the years of distance built from assumptions that were never questioned. Most of all, I thought about the lesson hidden inside it all. People had not rejected me. They had believed a story about me. And once they finally spoke to me instead of about me, that story could not survive. As darkness settled over the neighborhood, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. My place in the family had never truly disappeared. It had simply been hidden behind someone else's version of the truth. And now that the truth belonged to everyone again, I no longer needed to prove who I was. The people who mattered already knew.